Everyone just calls me Goat. I live and work in New Orleans. I'm one of those weird sound engineers that bounces back and forth between doing a lot of live work and a lot of studio work. And I've been doing recording studio work since I'm in my early 50s now. I've been doing this since like the late 80s professionally. So I grew up in, you know, when recording studios were these big scary places that were, you know, full of gear, and where in an era where if you wanted to make a record, you were either, you know, working on a 4-track tape machine in your bedroom, or you had to go to like a real big studio. So you know, growing up that way and growing up in this sort of analog world, I've kind of gotten myself into, you know, I have a real console. I have a whole bunch of preamps and a whole bunch of compressors. Even though I've kind of moved over to working in, you know, in the digital, you know, I use the computer as a tape machine. So I'm not doing a lot of mixing in the box. I'm not using a lot of plugins. I'm basically tracking into the computer, maybe doing some, you know, editing if I need to, and then coming back out to the console, mixing that way. The console that I'm using right now that I've had for quite a while, it's called the Trident Series 24, which is based on the Trident 65 series. This one is from 1979. It's, you know, it's all discrete modules. It's great. It was kind of almost their entry-level console at a time when, you know, a big console was a big deal, and Trident got this idea that maybe smaller studios were starting to emerge, and they built the Series 24. So that's the console that I'm using most of the time. So yeah, I grew up in Toronto and did a bunch of studio work there with a bunch of Canadian bands, and started working with a bunch of American bands at that time. There's a folk singer called Ani DeFranco who I did a whole bunch of work with, and it was actually with her that I first came down to New Orleans and did a lot of work here. And then when I drifted down into New Orleans, because of that, then I started working with a whole lot of New Orleans bands. I've worked with, you know, with the Meters, with the Neville Brothers. Certainly in the last decade, there's a whole scene on Frenchman Street where there's a lot of bands playing, and I've done tons of those records, which to me is a lot of fun. It's a lot of, like I was saying before, real bands playing real music. And you know, I have friends in LA, friends in Nashville, and a lot of records that they're doing are kind of like project records. Here in New Orleans, we don't really do a lot of project records. It's more like, I've got this band, we play, you know, every Tuesday at the Spotted Cat, and now we're gonna come in, play our set, and walk out with a record that sounds like the real band in the real room. With the Quantum 4848 coming out, for me, what's exciting about it is because I'm not using a lot of features from an interface other than input and output. To me, one rack space, 48 ins and 48 outs, I don't think that exists at this point in anything that I've seen. I just want to have a whole bunch of inputs and a whole bunch of outputs so that I can come from my preamps into the computer, and then outputs so that I can go from my computer into the console with, you know, with nothing else in the way. And to me, with the Quantum, it sounds really good. The latency is super low, and I get a whole bunch of inputs and outputs in a single rack space. That to me is like a miracle.